My friends, I'd like to talk to you today about the 5 strategic mistakes that I see most commonly made on a resume. Now, I recently did a couple of hundred resume reviews, saw a lot of consistent mistakes, and I did a series of videos where I talked kind of about like nitpicky things, individual things that I see. And in military speak, those are kind of like tactical mistakes. They're the little things. They're the sort of glaring things. I didn't really talk about like misspellings or anything like that, but they're small things in the grand scheme. What I wanted to talk to you today, and I did this whole board here, so I'm going to be talking and reading from this. What I wanted to talk about today were more strategic mistakes. And what I find is a lot of the tactical mistakes, a lot of the low-level things that people do wrong, a lot of it is largely due to a mindset. They're just looking at their resume wrong, and they don't take the right approach to it. And I want to talk about, I've got 5 themes identified today. Now, I've been watching a lot of TikTok videos by a guy named Scotty K Fitness, and he's kind of hilarious. He's also a little bit not safe for work. He uses some coarse language, shall we say. So don't get me in trouble if you go look up his videos and you're offended. Terribly sorry. However, he's hilarious. He does like cooking, and he's a big, jacked up dude. I'm trying to get there. But, he does videos in his kitchen. So, I thought, it's been a while. Haven't put out a video for a bit. And I've been kind of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, which I don't like doing that. So I figured, why not? Let's just do one in our kitchen tonight and see how it goes. So if you don't like it, let me know. I'm good for it. Some guy the other day was telling me my hairline stinks. I'm aware. I've had this most of my life. I say my teeth are bad. Yeah, got it. Anyway, so here, without further ado, here are the top 5 strategic mistakes that I see people making on their resumes. Number 1. And these are in no particular order of importance, but number 1 that I came up with is failure to brand. Now, don't everybody freak out at the word brand. I'm not saying you have to be a brand. I'm not a branding expert. None of that stuff. It's like, okay, so don't lose your mind. The example that I like to think of is, hopefully everyone's seen the movie Office Space, one of my favorites. In Office Space, there's lots of famous lines, but there's one famous line where the Bobs look at the jump to conclusions guy, and they're kind of flabbergasted, and they just say, "What is it you'd say you do here?" To me, that is brand. What do you do here? Or what do you want to do here? So you're making a resume, you're applying for jobs, or you're eventually going to apply for jobs. And the mistake that people make is they try to be all things to all people. The old jack of all trades, master of none. Try to cram everything onto a resume. Your resume should not list everything that you can do. You should have, I believe, you should have a job title listed. It should probably more or less match the job or jobs that you're applying for. You should have skills listed that are aligned with that job. If you, if you took up skydiving recently, or you're into wood carving or something like that, that's great. But if that doesn't relate to your job, don't list it. Your experience should echo your skills section. So if you list something in skills and it's not apparent that you have that in experience, oftentimes that rings a little bit hollow. People can tend to do what I call the skill stack avalanche, and they just dump everything that they've ever done in their skills section. If you're not really good at it, it's a little bit misleading if you're listing that as a skill. You should edit out anything unrelated. Folks, if you're a career pivot, this is especially important. And we get a lot of people coming into data analytics from other jobs, and they come to me and to try and help with their resumes, and they're looking for what do I keep? What do I cut out? And my answer is anything that's related. And what's related may or may not already be in your resume. You may have to put it in there. But there's plenty of things that I've done in my life that I don't put on my resume. In college, I flipped burgers at Wendy's. I I refereed intramural football. I don't put those things on my resume. Why? They're not on brand. My brand now is a data analyst. I don't list the vast majority of things I did in the Marine Corps. So you've got to stay on brand, whatever the brand is that you're trying to be as a professional. The number 2 thing that I would say is a strategic mistake is failure to sell. And there's another word. We already had brand. Everybody freaks out. I'm not a brand. Got it. I'm not a salesperson. I'm not in sales. Some people would say we're all in sales, but don't freak out at the word sell. Every resume is a sales job. If you can't sell yourself to the hiring manager, you're not going to get hired. I think everybody kind of understands that on a base level, but it can be very difficult to get it across to people. Your resume is a sales job. You have to sell that hiring manager on a couple of different basic concepts. Number 1, I can do this job. I'm qualified. Number 2, I want to do this job. I'm motivated. And number 3, and this is a toughie, I'm going to stay in this job. So we all kind of understand selling at a sort of a wave top level. Even if you're not in sales, you get it. Selling's a thing. Most people that have ever studied selling, if you've read Russell Brunson or if you've read any kind of sales book, there's a strategy, there's a technique to it. And you go through, and the most important thing you have to do is establish value. Got it. Okay, your resume is all trying to do that. One of the supplemental things that you have to do is anticipate objections. And that's key in persuasion and public speaking and debate, anything like that. You've got to anticipate objections. Look objectively at your resume and find the holes. What are people going to ask about you? So what are the things that maybe detract from that? I can do this job. I want to do this job. I'm going to stay in this job. If you're a bit of a job hopper, if you've hit a job for a year and it was just toxic and you had to get out of there, and then it took you 9 months to find another job, and now you don't have consistent employment, people reading your resume are going to wonder about that. So anticipate those objections. Get in there, and if you can't write something into your resume to cover that, just make sure you know how you're going to explain that. Lead with your best material. That's part of the sell job. The best stuff has got to be at the top. Talk about this a little bit more later. But you always want your most impressive material first, whether that's in the experience section or in the ordering of sections. Best stuff up top, best stuff at the start of the bullet. That's part of that sales job. So, recap. Number 1, make sure you're on brand. Make sure you know who you are and what you want to be, what you want to do. And number 2, make sure you're selling yourself effectively. The number 3 thing that I see people doing wrong strategically on their resume is failing to edit. There is a Jocko Willink expression that I love, and there's a great Akira the Don track that goes with it. Maybe I'll link it. But that track says discipline equals freedom. And in that track, Jocko Willink explains that discipline and adherence to a routine, adherence to structure, following certain rules is freeing. The reason why is if you have absolute freedom, you quickly wind up in paralysis by analysis. And you have too many choices, and it's almost impossible to narrow them down. If somebody hands you 3 choices, they say you can be these 3 things, it's easy to pick one of the 3. Generally, one of them you're like, that one I hate, and then these other 2, okay, let's go pros and cons. That's a simple challenge. If somebody says you can take one of 100 jobs, you're hosed. When I was coming out of high school, looking at all of the things that I thought I might be good at, might be interested in, it was just mind-blowing. It was almost by happenstance that I narrowed them down. So limits are a good thing. You want to adhere to norms when it comes to a resume. Why? Because you want to be respectful of people's time and energy. Far too many resume experts out there, refuse to answer the question, how long should my resume be? Folks, super simple. If you have 10 years or less of experience, make your resume 1 page. If you have more than 10 years, make it 2 pages. It should never be more than 2 pages. Period, full stop. Now, I'm always fond of saying Albert's first rule of internet debate is everybody knows a guy or is that guy. So I'm sure the comment section will now be full of poke you in the chest people to say, oh, I have a 3-page resume and I got a job. Great job. Yeah, I'm highly successful. Okay, sure. I have never seen a person that had some sort of extravagant or abnormal resume that got a good job on the strength of said resume. I'm happy to be wrong. Go ahead and tell me in the comments if you're an example of that. However, I'd be willing to bet, and I've never met a person that wasn't an outlier on this. If anybody comes to me and says, I've got a 4-page resume and I totally got interviews based on that, if I look at that, I'm betting there's a Harvard MBA on that resume. I'm betting they had network connections. I'm betting they have some staggering experience. They were at Meta doing data science for 5 years. Like, yeah, got it. You could have your resume printed in wingdings, and as long as somebody knows you, you're going to get a job, right? So your resume should not be all that you are on paper, because if it is, it's going to be a ream of paper for most of us. Adhere to the norms. Make it the normal length. 10 years or less, 1 page. 10 or more years, 2 pages. If you cannot edit your resume down to that accepted level, I would humbly suggest that you are failing in one of these other areas. You're not on brand. You're not selling yourself effectively by highlighting your best material and editing out, separating the wheat from the chaff, if you will. Allow me to suggest, I am happy to be wrong, and if you can prove me wrong, by all means. But far too many people out there are refusing to answer this question. There it is. 10 years or less, 1 page. More than 10 years, 2 pages. Now, if you can get it down to 1 page, that's awesome. There's a famous Mark Twain quote where he said, I didn't have enough time to write you a shorter letter. A better piece of writing is generally edited down to a more concise form. And think about it. It's a red flag. If a candidate applies and they have a 3 or 4 page resume, and invariably at least a page of that is just junk, it's not necessary. If that candidate shows that they can't self-edit into a manageable amount, that's a red flag for an employer. When a boss tells you, hey, we've got a group presentation to do, we got to present this project, your portion of the project, you have 90 seconds to brief it. Do you think if you sit up there and talk for 3 minutes, that's going to be okay? Of course not. Nobody would think that. And why? Because probably the whole team has a cap of 5 minutes. If the team leader has told you you've got 90 seconds, that's because the person right behind you got 90 seconds. And the team leader's got to wrap that up after that in a minute or less. Anytime you take over that is time you're taking from other people and time that you're detracting from the presentation. Limits exist for a reason. No hiring manager wants to sit there and read a 4-page resume. Not for any kind of normal entry-level or senior-level position. Okay? So, debate me if you like. I've never been proven wrong on this. Happy to be wrong in the future, but yeah, I would say if you're an exception, you're probably an outlier, and I can probably figure out pretty quickly why that is. Edit your resume down 1 or 2 pages max. That is number 3. And number 4, failure to flow. Okay, now I don't mean like hippie stuff here, I'm in a flow state, none of that. You want that document to have a logical flow. Does it make sense? Is the format attractive? Let me tell you a little story for a second. I spent some time in the Marine Corps. I don't know if I've mentioned that today or not. In the Marine Corps, we would have something called Field Day. every Thursday, the enlisted Marines in the barracks would have to clean their rooms so that they were inspection ready. And then Friday morning, some leader would come through and inspect the rooms. Usually it was a platoon sergeant, sometimes a first sergeant, sometimes an officer. They would step into the room, you would greet them, they would come through, they would kind of maybe touch a few things, maybe a white glove, looking for dust or mold or whatever. The most important thing on that inspection was not that there was no dirt anywhere, because that was impossible. The most important thing in that inspection was the moment that inspector stood in the doorway. Two things would win or lose that inspection: the sight and the smell. If they stood in that doorway and everything in the room was locked up, put away in its place, and if the smell hit them, the smell of Simple Green or Febreze or Formula 409, something that smells clean, their instant impression of those two senses was, this room is clean. And 9 times out of 10, they'd walk around and they'd find evidence that it was in fact clean. Whereas, if they stepped in the door and funk hit them in the face, and they immediately saw something that wasn't where it was supposed to be, now they're going and they're trying to confirm their confirmation bias in the other direction. A lot of people like to quote that resumes only get read for 7 seconds. That's probably more or less true, but what they don't say is resumes get read for an average of 7 seconds. Bad resumes don't get read for 7 seconds at all. They get glanced at for about 2 seconds. And the reason why is because 9 times out of 10, an experienced reader can pull up a resume and see that it's garbage within a second or two. So what you want is a resume that looks readable. It looks professional. It looks like it's been worked on, that it's a proud example of what you are and what you can do in that job. So you want it to have a logical flow. You want it to start with some sort of narrative summary, highlights, something talking the reader onto who you are, your brand, and these other elements that we've talked about. Does the organization of the resume draw the reader's attention down the page with the most important things at the top where you have their full attention? A summary, perhaps a set of skills or some major achievements, and then straight into the experience, which is the most important part anyway. Yep, I think that's it. It needs to flow, it needs to look attractive, it needs to look professional. Do that, and their confirmation bias is going to say, this person's a professional and I want to find data to back up my initial assumption. Do it not, and they're going to find evidence to the contrary. The fifth and final strategic mistake that I see people make with their resume is a failure to focus. Now, there's a well-worn expression that I first heard from one of my commanders in the Marine Corps. Don't know exactly who said it first, but I did do an internet search to try and figure it out. We'll say it was Einstein, I suppose. Never confuse effort with results. Now, I see far too many people doing this, thinking that a resume is a summation of work. And they do what I call activities, not accomplishments. They're listing all of the things that they did every day, and sometimes in the effort to find data and measurable impacts, they're saying, I did this mundane thing 1,000 times. It's not impactful. I deployed to Iraq and I did a lot of work on a lot of different things. We were training an Iraqi army brigade that wasn't the finest military force in the world. We were trying to get all of the equipment off of our combat outpost so we could close it down at the end of the deployment. These things took up all of my time. You know what didn't take up any time? There was an Iraqi presidential election while we were in the country. In support of that election, I got some rolls of barbed wire and handed them out to the local Iraqi police. I organized a logistics and resupply convoy. Hear that noise? That's my dog sneezing. And really it was a couple of hours worth of work. When I got my medal at the end of that deployment, what did the write-up talk about? My contributions to the very impactful Iraqi national election. Nothing about any of the projects that actually took up 99.9% of my time on that deployment. I almost laughed when they read it out loud. The point is this. The thing that I spent the least amount of time on actually had the most impact in real life. The things that mattered to me and took up my time and energy day to day really didn't matter that much. So I told you that story to tell you this story. You have to decouple your emotions from the hard work that you've done. Hard work doesn't mean a thing. Results, impacts, accomplishments, those have meaning. If you can quantify them, so much better, but don't make stuff up. You have to put your pride away. We associate a ton of emotional weight and pride and just juice with the work that we've put in. So hard. I worked on it day and night. Got it. But if it didn't succeed, if it didn't have impact, if the boss looked at it and said, thank you for all the hard work, I can see that this took you a lot of time, we'll take it under advisement, and then nothing ever happened with it, guess what? It didn't amount to anything. You may have great experience from it, and that's awesome. Codify your lessons learned, take them forward with you, put them to use. But if it doesn't have impact, probably shouldn't go on your resume. Make sure that you quantify your impact if you can. Make sure that you measure that or present those quantifiable impacts in terms of key performance indicators, things that are kind of recognizable if you can at all. But make sure that you are results oriented. Focus your resume on the things that you actually accomplished that had some sort of impact, rather than talking about showing up and answering emails and phone calls, and it's not impactful. Okay, so that's the bad news. That's all the things that people are doing wrong. I get it. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. I always leave you with one to grow on. So here's a project that we're going to do. Do this instead of all of these other things. Now, definitely fix those things. And I feel like each point I kind of went through the right way to do things as well as the wrong way. Here's something I want y'all to do. If you've watched me this far, I'm coming up past 20 minutes, so we'll wrap it up here. The thing that I want you to do is have an industry expert examine your resume, review your resume. Now, it doesn't have to be me. I charge money. It doesn't have to be a professional. It doesn't have to be a career coach or LinkedIn expert, branding guru, any of it. I know people get kind of the chunks rise in their throat when they hear those terms. I get it. But have someone within your industry take a look at your resume. And you want it to be someone unbiased. If your uncle's in the industry you want to get into, he's probably going to be mindful of your feelings, unless you have like a really brash uncle that will give it to you straight. Here's what I want you to do. Number one, go to LinkedIn. You know I couldn't get through a whole video without mentioning LinkedIn. Number two, I want you to think of an area where you have common ground with people. For a lot of us, that's where we went to college. Now, for me, I don't identify heavily with the places where I got my degrees, but maybe you do. Maybe you had an awesome college experience. So you say, I went to Arizona State, and it was the best 4 years of my life, and I am a proud Sun Devil, and I'm going to go connect with people that are also Sun Devils. Cool. That's good for you. I didn't go to Arizona State, but just saying, for example, I know people that did. You're going to go out there and you're going to find 10 people that share that common ground with you. If it was me, I might go find 10 Marines. Marines are in all sorts of different industries. You're going to go find 10 people. What is the criteria for said 10 people? Well, go to LinkedIn. Search for people in the industry that you want to work in or with the job title that you want to attain. And then filter by school, or previous employer or whatever it is. Find that criterion. You're going to find 10 people who are active on LinkedIn. Now, this is not a LinkedIn success video. I may do some of those some other time. It's a resume video. However, the number one characteristic of a desirable LinkedIn contact is they are active on LinkedIn. Why? Because the vast majority of people with a LinkedIn account never touch it. It does you no good to find the world's finest unicorn connection that has all of the contacts you want and works in your dream company and went to your college and whatever else. If they only check their LinkedIn account once every 6 months, you're never going to hear from them again. They're no good to you. So you're going to find 10 people who share that common ground with you, that alma mater, the previous employer. You're both, you're all from the same hometown. You're all from Chicago. So I don't know how you'd look that up either. But 10 people who share that common ground and are active on LinkedIn because they will actually answer your connection request. You're going to send them a connection request with a personal message. Said personal message is going to be personal. You are going to create a touch point with them. That touch point should probably be your shared common interest or background. So you say, hey, Frank, I see that you're a fellow Sun Devil. Go, that whatever your little cheer is there, Arizona State people. And then tell them briefly, what's your story? I'm trying to get into the project management field in auto manufacturing. And I see that you're quite successful there. I would love to ask you a couple of questions or just get a connection or something. So you're going to request connections with 10 people through a personal message. Now, you may have to pay a little extra for that. If you're not on premium, they only get you so many messages. You may have to wait a little bit. I prefer that you do this all in one shot. Just request 10 people in one day. That way it's all out there. You know who's going to answer, who's not. But everybody that answers you, you're going to strike up a personal conversation with them. You're going to ask them about your shared common ground. When were you at said school? When did you serve in the Marine Corps? Strike up a conversation with them, create some mutual interest. Be a good dude. I call it the good dude dividend. It's not gender specific. You can be a good dude as well. But gain that common ground. After no less than 3 messages exchanged, preferably more, but no less than 3 messages exchanged, you're going to ask them to review your resume. You should offer them something. A good kind of easy thing to sweeten the pot for people is like a $5 or $10 e-gift card to a known coffee shop. I don't get money from Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, but most people live near a Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks and can get something from there. Send that person, offer to buy that person a cup of coffee if they accept. Send them a $5 e-gift card to Starbucks or coffee shop of choice. It doesn't matter to me. But you're going to sweeten the pot a little bit. You will have an established connection. If they're putting out content, make sure you put on notifications for their content so you can reinforce their efforts to succeed on LinkedIn or whatever platform of choice. From there, if you request 10 personal connections from people with whom you have some shared experience, you are going to get at least 5 connections accepted. That's almost guaranteed. From those 5 connections accepted, you're probably going to get 3 people to engage in a somewhat ongoing conversation and get kind of invested in you. And from those 3 people, you should be able to get at least 1 or 2 to review your resume. Whether or not you got to buy them a cup of coffee, that's on you. But there's your project. That is your homework. If you cannot get an unbiased opinion on your resume, that is a fairly easy, cheap, fairly low effort technique to get a couple of people that are now contacts, friends in the industry. You're invested. You've given them something. They've given you something. Now you might even become friends. You never know. that is a story for another time. That is a networking video. We won't get into that today. However, I hope that that was helpful to you, my friends. 5 strategic mistakes that you want to avoid on your resume: failure to brand, failure to sell, failure to edit, failure to flow, and failure to focus. If you can turn that around and do each of those 5 things and get a nice unbiased observer within your industry or with that desired job title to review your resume, you're going to be well on your way to successful employment and hopefully a happy life. My friends, post your questions or comments below this video. Please, if you like this content, like and subscribe. If you hate me being in the kitchen, that's quite all right. I'll probably go back to the garage at some point. But with that, Semper Fidelis, and I'll talk to you later.